Welcome back to Derry Public Radio. Reporting from the basement of the Derry Civic Center, this is CM Alexander with your news. A local man has rescued 14 shelter dogs. Arthur Dunker, a man in his late 60s, went to the shelter looking for a companion. What he found was 14 dogs scheduled for euthanization. When asked why he decided to rescue all of them, Mr. Dunker said, even though it's a lot of work, taking care of these dogs is a labor of love. You're listening to Derry Public Radio. This is Derry Public Radio. Hey everyone, before we get started, I just want to tell you that this episode is rather dark. I know, Stephen King podcast, big surprise. But we do talk about some difficult themes, so please bear that in mind as you listen. Thank you. Welcome back to Derry Public Radio, a bi-weekly Stephen King book club podcast. I am one of your hosts, CM Alexander, alongside Benjamin Graham.
Guten Tag.
And Josh Kahn.
Hi, everybody.
Today we are on part 2 of different seasons, Apt Pupil book and movie, and we have Josh leading the discussion.
Yeah, let's get into our different season, Summer of Corruption. Now, Apt Pupil, I have a lot of feelings.
I don't even know where to start, you guys. There are so many angles to come at this from. Do we talk about the story? Do we talk about the movie? Because I have a lot of opinions about both. Very different opinions.
Yes, I would agree to that. I say let's just, let's break it down. First thing that is mentioned about this in this book, our protagonist, Todd, is a 13-year-old. Did anyone else have a hard time reminding themselves that he was 13 for the first half of this book?
I had a hard time remembering what 13 was like.
Okay, well, yeah, Todd Bowden. Oh my God, I'm literally sweating just thinking about, I on the drive over here to record, I just kept thinking, I'm like, I don't know that this is going to be a fun episode.
I was thinking the same thing. I can't tell you how many times in my notes I just have written down, Todd is a monster.
Apt Pupil concerns two people. Like, we can agree that there are really only two characters in this story. Like, there are other supporting cast members, but this is the story of Todd Bowden, who is a 13-year-old all-American boy. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed. Shucks, Ma, I sure do love school and sports, and I'm gonna grow up to be a detective and just a swell kid.
You could say an apt pupil.
And they will, at least 6 times in the book.
And one day, Todd Bowden goes to his neighbor, Mr. Danker's house, and approaches him because Mr. Danker is secretly Mr. Doosander, a Nazi war criminal hiding in America. He blackmails Mr. Doosander into telling him stories.
All the gushy details.
Is
how he puts it.
Jesus Christ.
Bad word for this.
So much of this story is bad. It's bad.
It really is. It's so dark.
It is the most, I think this might be one of the most grim, nihilistic books I've ever read by Stephen King.
Did you guys know that in German, Todd means death?
Did not know that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, this is just a dark fucking story and a perfect example of King's ability to write villains that you hate. Mm-hmm. The fact that the two main characters are both antagonists.
This Stephen King made me sympathize with a Nazi for several pages.
Yes, me too.
Like, I felt bad for a Nazi war criminal for like a chapter.
Until the cat.
Obviously, until the cat.
I never got that far. I hated both of them the entire time.
So Todd goes to his house and brings him his paper, and he calls him by his real name, not his fake name. And he's like, let me in. And he's like, I'll call the police if you don't leave. And he's like, do it. I'll tell him exactly who you are. And lets him in. And we have Todd's psycho stalker all the things that he has prepped, that he's gotten fingerprints from his mailbox. He's got photos of him. He's got books and stuff from the library that have all these photos of World War II stuff. And he just lays it all out. And then Doosander tries to say, no, that's not me. And then lists his entire fake backstory, a very elaborate, very believable fake backstory as to how he came to America and all this. And then Todd just coldly recites his service record to him. And then at that moment, he gives up and he's like, I've been found out by a fucking kid.
A terrifying, psychotic kid.
And see, the scariest part, I think, about Todd is, especially in this first section, is that I didn't find him scary at first.
Really?
Well, yes, I did. But the fact, the entire scene, this opening meeting between them, the way he is acting is with utmost confidence. He is, later in the book, Doosander describes him as, you have this unfailing American confidence.
That is the part that freaked me out about it.
And
that's being a sociopath.
Yes. Yeah. And I kept imagining him as this little kid. I kept imagining him as Dennis the Menace almost.
Yeah.
Just like, well, golly gee, Mr. Doosander, you were a Nazi, and I really would like to hear about all the war crimes you did. And that made him all the more awful. And that in that first meeting, as soon as Doosander understands, he tells him, you're a monster. And he is.
Yeah.
When a Nazi can call you a monster.
And he's right.
And he is correct. But I also appreciate that Todd's like, well, I might be a monster, but I mean, so are you.
Yeah.
He's just really nonchalant about
man.
I mean,
you're a Nazi.
If we're gonna draw a line in the sand, we're both on one side of it.
On a lighter note, did you guys catch that Doosander knows Andy?
Yeah. That blew my mind.
That was
actually
awesome.
That in just his rundown of how he came to the States and how he's lived, he casually mentions, oh yeah, I bought some stocks from this guy up in Maine who was good with money. I heard he murdered his wife and went to prison forever. Don't worry about it.
He remembered his last name, too, because it sounded similar to his.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. I was like, I just read that.
Yeah, and it made me very excited going forward.
That was a neat little
Easter egg. And the only
egg.
Fun thing about this story.
Well, there's another Easter egg, too.
Yeah?
I didn't catch that.
He mentions a serial killer, Spring Heel Jack, which is a character from one of the Night Shift stories.
Well, Spring Heel Jack is...
Well, he's... But King uses him.
Oh, really? Yeah. I don't remember that story.
I can't remember which story, but it's in that book.
Now, I pulled out...
Looking forward to reading that, too.
From this point when they still have their first meeting. There's so much in this first meeting. When they're talking about calling each other monsters, I pulled this quote that Doosander tells him when he's talking about all the terrible things he did. He says... Only those who lose are tried as war criminals for following orders. Todd's response to that is basically an understanding of how politics works.
Yeah.
That it's a level of intelligence and awareness that also makes it piles on how terrifying Todd is, because he takes something like what, is a fairly it's an accurate statement and makes it and basically draws the conclusion that Doosander's alluding to of like, yeah, I mean, you make up whatever justifies your actions. That's how politics works.
As they say later on in the story, Todd has many grown-up thoughts.
Yeah.
His brain does not operate
shudder
like a 13-year-old boy.
And yeah, the characterization of these two in this, like, immediately from the outset is so amazing. They're so fully drawn. We understand these two right off the bat. And Doosander is in the beginning described as this like disgusting, pathetic old man. And
he gets some of his life back though through this relationship with Todd, as Todd is pulling these stories out of him. He is becoming, it seems, more like vital and with it. Like he finally has something to live for again, which just adds to the disturbing nature of the whole relationship and story.
That's where I was, yes. Because I think this is a good segue to start our discussion of the movie.
Do we have to?
Because, yes, so throughout the story, the story is subtitled The Summer of Corruption. And the whole story is Doosander telling Todd these terrible stories and it corrupting his soul and turning him worse and worse until he's monstrous, which we'll get into. Through bringing this out of Doosander, he brings this monster that Doosander used to be to the forefront. And their corruption mirrors each other. Which is why I want to talk about the movie, because none of that happens.
No. Nope.
This fucking movie.
It was so watered down and just they took everything interesting out of it.
Yeah.
It was bad.
Except I'm happy that we did not have to watch the cat dying. Because Ben, you had to watch it on your own, but Josh and I watched it together and we're on our respective couches and I think we're both like, I can feel my body trying to go backwards into the cushions, trying to get away from that scene where Doosander's going to put this cat in the oven. Because of course he is. And he doesn't, like the cat gets away, but that whole scene is just like, no, I can't watch this fucking movie if they're going to kill a cat. I almost threw the book across the room at that point. I hated that.
There were so many parts of this. I'm like, well, CM is
CM's not going to be happy.
I did not watch House of Cards when it first came out because he kills a dog in the first 5 minutes. And I was like, no, I've never seen a single episode of that show.
I've also never seen it, but
that's going to come back later in an interesting way. Let's anyway, we have this movie, the casting is terrible. I went in, I hadn't heard good things about Apt Pupil. I had never seen it before, but I went in thinking, well, at least Ian McKellen's in it. Ian McKellen will be the saving grace. What did you guys think?
I sure do love Ian McKellen.
I do. He did the best with what he was given.
Sure did.
You know who brought it?
David Schwimmer's mustache?
Well, okay, I'm sorry. You know who else brought it?
Who?
I can't remember his name.
Good.
The guy in the bed. The
patient.
Hospital,
yeah, the guy who.
Jesus Christ.
No, when he realizes who Doosander is, and he's like putting his fist in his mouth to stifle a scream of terror, and he makes his way out of the room towards this nurse, and he just collapses into her and starts sobbing.
That was
I
huge.
teared up.
That was super emotional.
That got me hard.
I choked back laughter at
Ben.
the most overacting I have ever seen in my entire life. At least up to a few minutes ago when Ian McKellen was stomping around a sad kitchen and taking out all of the menace of a very menacing scene.
Yeah.
That was goofy.
It was all fucking goofy.
I have to disagree with you on the hospital scene.
I did that hospital scene. It didn't. I wasn't on board until the collapse into the nurse's arms, and then as I pulled it all together, I was like, yeah, okay. Overall, I think all of those choices worked.
It was the only emotion in the film.
that is frighteningly accurate.
That is very true.
There was not a lot of range, and that going back to the thing that the movie is missing, the emotion in the story. So as we talked about, as these stories go on, essentially, Doosander gets stronger and Todd gets a little weaker. Like when he tells them about the Pegasus project, which they just butcher in the movie, that whole story. But it's gas that didn't kill them. It made them laugh hysterically. But when Todd's asking about the experimental gases and stuff like that, Doosander just says, we had this one, I remember the Pegasus project, and it didn't work. And Todd just latches onto that pause, and he's like, no, you tell me exactly what it did. It didn't work, but what did it do? And so he's pulling this information out of him every opening he gets. And then as he keeps telling more and more stories, suddenly the details just become free.
He becomes less reluctant.
Yeah, and he just opens up to all these things, and slowly drives Todd insane.
The power dynamic between the two is like the driving force of the entire book. And as that power dynamic shifts, starting with the uniform.
But that's the scene I was talking about. I felt bad for a Nazi when he opens the present, looks at the SS uniform, and begs him. He begs this 13-year-old child, don't make me put this on. And I was like, holy shit, man.
That's interesting because I can see feeling that way for the first part. Todd buys Doosander a present after months, right? It's been months at this point. He buys Doosander a present, and it is a cheap SS uniform costume. And he tells Doosander, put it on. Doosander strips down in the kitchen in front of him and is described as like sickly and pathetic, sallow and pathetic. Yeah. And you're almost, I can see almost being drawn to be sympathetic. But immediately he puts on this uniform and Todd makes him march and goose step around his kitchen. While he is doing it, Doosander's describing the feelings coming back to him. That he's remembering that he's pushed all of this evil that he did years ago away for so long, but now he's remembering it. Todd is forcing him to remember it. And he's remembering that he likes it. And you're like, oh, fuck this guy.
Yep.
Fuck this guy. And that's the moment that this power shift happens, where Todd says, okay, you stop now. And he keeps marching. You feel
it's like
something's been awoken.
Todd just at that moment realized what he was messing with.
Yeah.
It is, but yeah, it's such an intense scene, and the movie just shits all over it. It really does.
It doesn't translate.
He does when in the movie he puts on the uniform and he's marching in place. You can see him like he has like slumped shoulders, and he's not, fast or precise.
He's not into it.
Yeah, he's not into it, and he's kind of making a mockery out of it. But as he keeps calling out commands, they get a little sharper and a little sharper until finally that one last turn, and it is perfect. And then he starts going for it, and I was like, there it is. And then they cut to the wide shot of it, and I was like, oh, it's gone.
Yeah, it's just poor,
and here's
poor directing choices.
Yeah.
They knew what they were going for, but
here's
they
the
failed.
other problem. Oh, sorry. So amped up. The other problem is it's Ian McKellen doing this.
Yeah.
I could not separate that. He was never pathetic.
He's always dignified.
He was always Ian McKellen.
Yeah, he does. Ian McKellen has a certain amount of just class and power. Well, in the book, it describes the first time Todd sees him and describes him that he looks like a mix of Einstein and Boris Karloff.
Yeah.
So my mental image is a very specific one, and Ian McKellen does not fit that specific image.
I have never before and probably will never say again that Ian McKellen was miscast in anything. But he just is not the right person for this role.
I don't know who would be.
Yeah, me neither.
But it's a hard role, especially when you have the story that watered down.
The bad guy chef from Ratatouille.
Nailed it.
Right? He's all gaunt and pointy.
Yep, and fully animated.
Yes. Okay, so where does that?
So let's talk about Todd's parents, and they have Doosander over for dinner because Todd has been saying that he's reading to him. That's his excuse for being over there every day of the week. And his parents, Dick and Monica, are the most oblivious humans in the world. They were infuriating in every scene they were in because they pat themselves on the back for how well they're raising their child by essentially letting him raise himself. Like, they often talk about the amount of freedom and like that they're there to touch base if he needs them, but they had overbearing parents, so they are going the complete opposite, and they have all this money. They live in a very nice neighborhood.
They're the cool parents.
Yeah.
So whenever in the early scenes, Todd and his mother call themselves by their first names. Hey, Monica, baby.
I hated
weird,
that, by the way.
Weird choice.
Did you guys have the impression that they were in part just oblivious because maybe this kid is just so good at controlling outwardly how he presents himself that they really have no idea what he's actually like? Or, so for me, part of it felt like they were willfully oblivious.
Yeah.
Like if they had seen an inkling of it, kind of like the dad did when Todd got angry, they would ignore it.
Yes, I 100% feel that for every interaction they have. There are plenty of times, especially as the book goes on, that Todd is breaking. Like, he can't keep his stoic exterior, and he continually starts losing it in little ways and doing little suspicious things. And there's a scene, this is very late into the book, where they have a conversation in their twin beds next to each other. They don't share a bed. Twin beds next to each other.
Thank you for clarifying, because I was so confused reading that. Wait, twin beds, but how are they like high-fiving each other about what great parenting they've done?
Really jerking themselves off about being dynamite parents and like all that stuff, and they have excuses. That's their parenting style is excuses.
Yeah,
and it is tragic, and it drove me insane.
It was painful to watch because he is still a kid. I mean, sociopath or not, no matter how good he is at hiding that, he's still a kid. They are his parents and theoretically should have some insight into what's going on with him.
He's 13. Like, it keeps coming back to that for me. Like, it's crazy. He's way too young to have the freedom and have the equal say he has in his family dynamic.
And to call his mom Monica baby. Stop.
Knock it off. So we'll get back to going back to Doosander. We find out that he has started wearing the SS uniform as pajamas, which is also something that they don't talk about. They don't even reference in the movie. I was glad that they showed one of Todd's nightmares, because the nightmares are very, very important in the book. And they talk about both of their nightmares.
His nightmares that in the book are terrifying and cause him to have wet dreams, but in the movie manifest by him getting real sweaty. Real sweaty.
In the book, it does talk about, like, when Monica and Dick are talking, she talks about, like, his sheets being soaked.
Okay.
And, like, so there is a reference to him, like, basically sweating real hard throughout the night all the time.
It's like the movie didn't want to take any risks, and this book is so disturbing that it was almost insulting.
The disturbing sexuality aspects of Todd, because the violence, like this violence happens to him right at puberty, and the violence gets tied up with his sex drive to where he starts thinking about murder. He watches a bum under a railroad platform and thinks about stabbing him with a knife and notices he has an erection. I'm not upset that wasn't in the movie, but it's such a pivotal part of what the story is.
They could have done something to represent that.
Yeah. There's an absurd amount of disturbing details.
And I thought they were going to have more of that in there because they aged him up. And I thought maybe that's why they did that, because
God, that pissed me off.
It's I guess less difficult for audiences to watch something like that with a more adult person than a child. But no, so why did they age him up? What was the point?
There's so many changes in the movie that's exactly why. Why did they change this?
Also, why did they not only make Todd 16 but a senior in high school?
Yeah,
because he's an apt pupil.
I forgot about that.
Right.
I know, and it's one line. I know it must be hard being 16 and also a senior. What?
It's like such a throwaway. Yeah. It wasn't in the book.
It's so pointless.
It's because the book goes between him being 13 all the way up to being 18 and graduating high school.
Yeah, this takes place over years.
They are.
Yes.
They're trying to condense everything into a matter of
dumbest
months.
way possible. Yeah. And this is the least of the problems with changes in the movie, because some of the changes are downright disgusting.
Go on.
Doosander, okay, we're getting ahead of ourselves here.
We've never done that on the show.
The murders.
Okay.
In the book, Todd's grades start to fall really badly. And his guidance counselor, Ed French, says, oh, you have to get your grades up by the end of this next term, or I'm going to have to meet with your parents. I'm going to send them all this stuff. And the pressure drives him insane. And skipping a bunch of stuff, eventually murders start happening. In the book, Doosander is murdering bums by luring them home on the bus with the promise of food and a bath and money and the same things that he did to get information out of the Jews in the death camps by promising them food and all this. And then he murders them in his kitchen, buries them in his basement, just because he's fucking evil. But in the movie, the hobo is just in his backyard and sees him walking around in his SS uniform and comes in and is like, I know something about you, so give me money. So he brings him in, and that turns his motive for murdering this hobo into some sick self-defense. And why the fuck do we care if this guy's defending? No, fuck you. That's not evil enough. Why change it? Why change it? Why change it? Why make him less evil? Why? He's a Nazi. He should be the most evil thing in the world.
Right.
Why?
It's interesting that your impression of the bum was that he was insinuating something about him, because for some reason I saw him see Doosander in his uniform, but he didn't seem to care or sort of like recognize what that was. Not that he couldn't tell what it was, but like more concerned with rifling through his garbage to get cans to get some change. And I thought that on the bus, when they were kind of making eye contact, that he thought Doosander was looking for company, gentlemen.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
And I'll be completely honest, I checked out during certain parts of this movie because it was fucking terrible and I hated it. I think it was ambiguous. It was definitely both, I think. But I mean, he was still killing because he's like, this bum, whether he knows he's a loose end. And it wasn't just I feel like murdering.
The murder rakes are coming.
Yeah.
Better scratch that itch. Which is kind of what, I mean, Todd and him share that by the end. Pulling back, since you were talking about the promises he made to the bums and his way of interrogating, this is something that I didn't think was going to circle back. I thought it was kind of a throwaway thing, but he talks about the lamb stew. That when he was in the concentration camp and he would bring someone to find out who was hiding anything, get people just to spill their guts, they would have lamb stew sitting on the stove. And so they would bring them in the room and they would just smell it. And he said that the implication was always they would get food. They didn't get food, but they put the impression out there that if they did give everything up, they'd get food. And he described it as elegant. That his form of torture was elegant.
So a couple of years ago, do you guys remember that there was a Holocaust survivor? I think her name was Eva Kor. She publicly forgave a Nazi guard at his trial. And I remember when I saw that article, I couldn't reconcile that. It really bothered me. I couldn't figure out why she would forgive him because not being religious myself, I couldn't associate it with anything useful. It's like, well, no, don't ever forgive him. Screw that guy. And it stuck with me for a really long time. And at some point I happened across this quote in a book by Dr. Travis Bradbury. He does these like emotional intelligence books where he talks about, there are different types of intelligence. Some of them are emotional. There's this quote that I want to share because this is the only way I was able to deal with how I was feeling about her forgiving this Nazi. You don't have to wait for an apology to forgive. When you forgive someone, it doesn't condone their actions. It simply frees you from being their eternal victim.
Interesting.
Wow.
That woman sounds like a living saint.
Right.
All right. So let's jump back in. We've talked about Todd's falling grades, and we meet Ed French. Ed French has been he's the guidance counselor, expertly played by David Schwimmer and David Schwimmer's mustache. And he basically is trying to get a hold of Todd's parents because all of his grades are plummeting. Also, I don't know why I thought that was a weird difference, but in the movie, all of his grades are like completely garbage. And in the book that he specifically mentions, all of them except for English and history are the only ones that didn't fall. And I just thought that was a unnecessary distinction, but I wanted to bring it up because I thought it was weird.
That change kind of makes sense to me because in the book, he is still 13 or 14 years old.
Right.
And he's always been an A and B student, and one grade drops. And that's all it takes for Doosander to get the upper hand. And Doosander even says, like, if you come out and say that, I'm a Nazi, it will hurt me much more than it hurts you. But he is still, so just the idea of one grade being bad is enough to paralyze him.
Yeah.
And in the movie, since he's older, I think it made sense for them to be like, I don't think that's a big enough motivation for an older kid.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So we find out that French wants to meet with his parents. They come up with a plan that Doosander is going to pose as Todd's grandfather. I believe it's Todd's idea that he poses his grandfather. Yeah, in the book, it's Todd's idea, and Todd's like, "You're gonna do this." So Doosander goes in, and he pretends to be Todd's grandfather. They make the deal that if Todd brings all of his grades up, they'll call it square. But if any of his grades, if he gets any D's or F's, the parents have to get involved. And as he leaves, French thinks, he didn't call his grandson by his name one time.
Called him the boy.
Just called him the boy. And I didn't think enough of that to make a note of it at the time, but when it came back later, I was like, son of a bitch, Stephen King. You really just slipped that one in there.
Well, then that starts this sort of, again, the tables are turned and Todd becomes the one that Doosander's, drilling into and he's making him do all his homework, and Todd basically becomes an apt pupil.
God damn it.
I have to get it in as much as the book got it in. I'm at 3.
So you've got 7 more. Good. So when they're like, all right, this plan worked, and Todd finds out the agreement that was made about his grades, he flips out, and that's when Doosander's like, well, now, if you gave me too much power, buddy, now we're locked in this together. If I'm outed, I just posed as your grandfather. I could not have done that without you. Everyone will know.
I couldn't have done that without you. Bryan Singer and the screenwriters of the Apt Pupil movie.
And this is the first major outburst of Todd's violence, because on his way home, he sees a bird lying in the street, and he rolls over it with his bicycle tire for 5 minutes.
Pardon me for laughing. It is not funny. In the book, it is...
it made my heart beat real fast reading all that scene.
That was probably about the point that I put the book down and realized I had been reading for like 3 hours straight. It's intense and disturbing, and is the first glimpse you have into just how deeply corrupted Todd has become. In the movie, he hits a pigeon with a basketball.
Not even, I mean, if it had been like several like if he was like intensely like
it was gonna be.
Slamming it, like you don't see it, but you bloody. Just see him doing it, like that would have conveyed the intensity that the scene in the book is trying to convey, and that would have been cool. But no, he just walks over and he bounces the basketball in front of it a couple times, and then throws the ball and walks away.
Yeah, so dumb. It's so dumb. And the basketball becomes the Godfather's oranges for this movie. The basketball comes back in the final scene, and I guess is supposed to be I don't know.
I guess.
Film language for look how menacing Todd's being.
Yeah, that's
and it is not in any way at all.
Now we have the escalation of violence is now starting.
Yes.
We've talked about Dussander establishes he has been killing stray cats in his oven. Then we have an entire scene where he goes to adopt a dog, and I got very angry. But the quote that I pulled out of that chapter is when he talks about how they have to euthanize the dogs that don't get adopted. And he says, "We give them gas. It's very humane. They don't feel a thing." And Dussander says, "No, I'm sure they don't."
Another point where I wanted to throw the book.
Barf.
Yeah, like I got sick to my stomach so many times.
This book is so goddamn bleak. And I'm actually glad we read this so close after the dark half and our discussion of Bachman versus King. Did either of you... I had the feeling that this was closer to a Bachman book than a King book. Did either of you?
I've never read a Bachman book. So if this is what it's like, fucking sign me up. Let's do this.
Yeah.
I kept describing when I was talking to other people about it, because I physically can't talk to either of you until we record.
Right.
Or else we'll talk about it forever and not do this podcast. I use the word visceral about 1,000 times because it's the most aggressive and violent way I can describe the feelings that I'm feeling.
And it's not a lot of other Stephen King books that I really do enjoy. The horror in it is this sort of fantastical or somehow mystical or mythical boogeyman. It's not real people. And that is what made it so unpleasant to read. I'm finished in record time, and I didn't finish until yesterday because I just didn't want to pick up the book.
I can't blame you. This was I think this is the longest it's taken me to read any of the stuff that we've been doing. All right, so Todd passes his classes. We think we're all done. Like, all right, crisis averted. But the only way I'm going to be free of this is if I kill Dussander. And he comes up with a plan, and he's going to push the old man down the stairs when he's going to get his booze. And just before he does that, Dussander's telling him, like, "Oh, I'm going to give you another one of my stories." And it's the story of an old man who was afraid of a fucking psychopath, and says that he bought a safety deposit box, wrote down everything they've done together, put it in, and if he dies, it will be opened.
This was probably my favorite part of the whole book.
And he was like, "And by the way, I heard you when you got up from your chair."
That was great.
He's like, yeah, because he's like this hardened, criminal who has been on the run, who knows how to watch his back and look after himself.
And Todd's awakened any dormant ability in him, basically. He's at the top of his game. Oh, basically, he is able to then trap him in that logic trap of like, we are never going to be free from one another. As if you tell me that the note that you say you wrote and all the evidence you say you have that you gave it to a friend for safekeeping in case something happened to you, if you tell me you got rid of it, if you bring it here and burn it, I won't know you didn't make a copy. I could do that with this 12-page manuscript I wrote about what we've done and burn it in front of you. You would never know I didn't make another copy. No matter what happens, we are tied together forever. And then Todd stabs a homeless guy 37 times in the face with a Swiss Army knife.
With a butcher's knife.
Was it a butcher knife?
Kitchen. Yeah, he buys...
He thinks about doing it with a Swiss Army knife, but then he comes back with the butcher knife and stabs the wino 37 times.
He describes that he stops moving after the 6th. And then walks home covered in blood.
Yeah.
Just walks... Another point against his parents. The fuck were they doing?
And then you know what happens next? Todd turns 14.
God.
Right? Like, it ends with that thing, and then like the next paragraph is like, Todd's birthday just happened, and he's 14. Like, oh God.
I don't know if you guys, this is a minor thing, but I thought stylistically it was really cool that up to this point in the book, every chapter has been a month at a time. And as soon as the murders happen, the chapters lose that. The structure drops out of the book, and it becomes more freeform.
I really liked that. I thought it was very effective, because then don't we get like the next 2 years?
Yeah, the next 2 years are very like summarized. So we have, in that time, Dusander has killed 3 more winos in the next year. And so the next year happens, he's killed 3 more bums. Todd has also killed one with a hammer because the nightmares have started again, and that's the only way he could think to quiet the nightmares. Then we go another year. Todd has killed 4 more homeless people and stabbed 2, bludgeoned 2. Dusander has killed 2 more, with one of them nearly escaping, which is kind of the instance we get in the movie where like he stabs him and he doesn't die right away, where every other one has gone off almost perfectly. Yeah. And this is the first one that he stabbed him and the guy got up and freaked out, which is just another problem with the movie, condensing every major action piece into just the single one. But so in the 2 years, their body counts just shoot up, because we've seen that escalation. We've seen it take off. And now Todd is thinking about taking his gun and shooting people in rush hour traffic, going so far as to finding a spot, taking his gun out, and dry firing at the people he lines up in his sights.
Which also sexually arouses him.
Yes.
And it's horrible to read.
Without skipping ahead to our ratings, I
cannot wait for CM's rating at the end of this.
Me too. I thought about that a lot. This book was, in my opinion, great, but it was not fun. Yeah, the way that CM described it, it's terrible. You know that this story is going to end horribly. There's no way for it to end other than horribly.
Yeah, it has to.
I think the movie proves
that you can just let loose in.
We'll get to that.
Although I'm so relieved that this is a short story and this is it. Like, we're after this podcast, I don't have to read or talk about or watch this ever again.
It's definitely one of those things. There are some movies I really love, but I've watched them once and I will never watch them again. I can't take it emotionally.
Remind me, was this your first reading of this?
Yes.
It was yours, Josh, right?
Yeah, it was mine.
Okay, I have read this before. I read it when I was a teenager and I watched the movie. I had a vague memory of overall like what it is about and what happened. And I just, as I was reading it, I kept thinking, I don't remember these feelings when I was a teenager. And why is that? Is it because I was more naive in these characters and situations? I mean, despite knowing our history, these characters and situations seemed more like that boogeyman to me, and not, this is something humans do and have done and will continue to do.
Could it be that it's 2018 and there are Nazis out there right now? Fuck you guys. If you're listening, fuck you.
It just, anyway. as an impressionable teenager, didn't really faze me or bother me much, but I had such a hard time as an adult. I know too much about the world, you guys.
Right.
It's sad.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. It's hard. We've said it plenty of times in this episode. It's hard to get through some of this.
Yeah. Can we wrap it? Are we done?
All right. Well, we're in the home stretch here, kind of.
Yeah, so, we're only like halfway through this.
Now we have Dusander goes to kill another bum, kills him, drags him down to the basement, has the grave dug, all that, and has a heart attack and pulls himself up to call Todd. Now they haven't spoken in about 2 years at this point.
And, we missed an important part. This letter that Todd believes will out him. We have discovered at some point Dusander scares him with this letter once more, I believe as he's leaving to go on vacation. And he just fucks with Todd's mind and he runs out of the house and ends with, of course this letter isn't real.
Right, yeah. There's no safety deposit box.
There is no safety deposit box. It's completely fake. And so when Todd gets the call about this, I'm having a heart attack, you get over here, Todd is still under the impression that he has to help or else.
Yeah, he has him under his thumb.
Right. And so Todd gets over there, races over to the house. Meanwhile, Dusander's been having this heart attack and I think it says he's been having it for like an hour at this point. And Todd freaks out and he's like, what are you doing? And Dusander, like, just off the cuff is just like, I know you have experience in what you need to do, so just get it done. Like, let's not, sit here and talk about why you should. Like, I know you know how to dispose of a body. You've been doing it. Go do it. And so Todd leaps into action, buries the body, finds the missing shoe, cleans everything up, calls his dad, says that Dusander's having a heart attack. What do I do? Calls the cops, calls for an ambulance, and then realizes the whole excuse was, he says, tell them that I got a letter and I need you to read it for me. And he's like, I'm missing something. The letter. And runs over to Dusander and he's like, there's in my drawer, there's a locked box. Get a letter out of there. And so he goes up, breaks it open, and he gets the letter downstairs just in time for his dad to pull in and come into the house, and immediately followed by the ambulance.
And that was so cool. And I missed that so much from the movie.
Yes. That scene was not nearly as intense.
No. And it was that
tense.
In the book, I was like reading faster and faster during that section. It was just like, it really brings home how crazy and horrible both of them are. Just that moment where he's like, yeah, you know how to handle this. I know you do. I can tell.
All right. And then we jump to a character that we've never met before, Morris. Just at that climax, all of a sudden we're being introduced to a character we have never met who falls off a ladder and breaks his back.
But it was, I'm sorry.
Go on. You really want to go into depth about Morris?
His wife.
Lydia?
Not in the movie at all.
Nope.
Thankfully. She was sort of that stereotypical that you
just a
see
nagging
in
wife.
movies. And I thought we were going to get, our beloved Stephen King, like, let's dive into this lady's mind and do some crazy nothing.
Pass. No one cares.
Instead, as he breaks his back doing yard work, and we find out that he has a number tattooed on his arm. And the second that detail is mentioned, I was like, oh,
yeah,
this is some endgame shit. This is...
I didn't expect that.
Did not see it coming.
I thought Dusander and Todd were just going to, end up tearing each other apart. And this was a pretty cool surprise.
And then not only is he a survivor, but he is a survivor of the specific concentration camp that Dusander was in charge of. And they are sharing a room.
Does it border on Deus Ex Machina?
100%.
It's at least they're grazing. Not as bad as the Deus Ex Machina of, meanwhile, Mr. Frank is at a conference.
French.
Ah!
It happened. Hooray. Everyone take a drink. Mr. French is at a conference for guidance counselors across the state.
Yeah, it is a thing. I'm sure it is.
I'm sure it is. But it just so happens to be in the city that Todd Bowden's grandpa said he was from 6 years ago or something like that. But he remembers it and decides to call him because he's bored. This whole part, I was like, okay.
He flips through the phone book, just casually reading the phone book.
I guess it takes place in the 70s.
Sure.
A phone book is like a big book that it has all the numbers of everybody in it.
It's like Google, but a book. So he calls Todd's real grandfather and finds out, wait, this isn't that guy that I talked to. That's weird.
Also, his grandpa calls Todd by his name.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We are in the hospital, and Dusander and Morris is saying, I recognize this guy. And finally, he has a nightmare in which he smells lamb stew, and it occurs to him. And he wakes up, and he can feel his feet. And it's a day of miracles. Mm-hmm. He gets out of the hospital. Doosander wakes up to a man with a Star of David pin on his lapel. My favorite character in this book. I do not remember his name. Weisskopf, who is saying, I know who you are. This is it. Mm-hmm. We are going to be taking you back and trying you for your crimes.
At which point Doosander commits suicide. And I want to talk about how, I don't know, maybe Ben, you won't agree with this, but I thought the movie did it way harder. Like, he dies hard in the movie. It was way more visceral. It reminded me.
It was way more overacted.
Oh my God.
Dial it back.
I hated everything about this movie, you guys.
Well, so we were talking about this before we came in to record, that it reminded me a lot of our discussion in Carrie, where in the book, it was like when she kills her mom, it's like, I wanted it to be better. And in the movie, it's fucking rad. And it's great. Well, where in this,
he deserved a hard death.
That's true. Yeah. And it's another matter of it just wouldn't translate well to screen. Because what happens in the book is he takes these pills and he takes 3 and waits until he gets sleepy because he doesn't want to throw them up. He wants to die right. And he takes another 3. And just as he's drifting off to sleep, he's saying, oh, finally, I won't have to worry about all of this. Unless there are dreams. No, not the dreams. He's been having these horrific dreams of the people in the camps coming for him. And as he dies, he feels the dreams. He feels skeletal hands reaching up for him and dragging him down into the dreams forever. Fucking
so
rad.
Awesome.
You cannot do that in a movie.
It's so perfect.
The fact that his last thoughts are no, and he's trying to not fall asleep. Like, he's trying to fight through it now, and he gives in, and that's it.
Fuck that guy.
And then once he dies, the news comes out. It's all over the papers that he is actually a Nazi. And I wrote it down that it was when everybody finds out, his parents freak out, Todd faints, and Ed Finch chokes.
Ed French?
Damn it! I'm Ben!
It's catching!
And Ed, like, chokes on like, his coffee or something. Like, they show, like, everybody finding out the news. Then they find out that this Weisskopf wants to talk to Todd. The cop, Richler, goes to interview the family, and Todd's denying that he knows anything. And through that whole scene, as Todd's answering questions, I was like, all right, this is it. Todd's, he's playing his game. Like, he's giving his answers. And like, asking about phone calls. And he's like, oh yeah, he got a couple of phone calls a week. He never said anything about them, but it happened. And I was like, God damn it, Todd got away with it again. And then the next scene is Richler and Weisskopf. And he's like, the kid's full of shit.
That was awesome.
That was, I think I've said this already 2 or 3 times this episode. But that was my other favorite part of this book. Is I want a sequel story that's all about Weisskopf. I wanted a story that's all about that dude hunting Nazis.
Right?
That would be
all right.
Awesome.
I'm on board. The problem that I had with his characters, because we're coming down to like the last 30 pages or so of this book, that he goes through and he makes these leaps in deduction and basically 100% hits every story point between them. And is like, well, if that's the case, then most likely this very specific thing happened between them. And I was like, bullshit, dude.
Yeah.
Bullshit. You are not Sherlock Holmes. But and then a random bum, we get introduced to more characters we've never met. A random bum comes forward and saw Todd's face in the paper for making the All-Star team. And it's like, this is the guy that I saw 2 of the bums that died. I saw them with this kid. I 100% know. And so there's just another thing that was set up that goes right up against Todd. Then Ed Finch.
French.
Finch. No, it's Finch.
No, it's
I don't know anymore.
I don't know.
It's Ed French.
French, right?
Okay.
Same.
Yeah.
Kedman Walking shows up to
We
Todd's
haven't mentioned
house.
that this episode at all. No one's
Easter
going to
egg.
know what the hell that means.
It's his
Don't
nickname.
worry about it, guys. Read the book.
Where's Keds? It's not a complicated nickname. It was given to him by 13-year-olds. There's not a lot of range there. So Todd is sitting there cleaning his gun and he loads it, and he's like, I don't know why I loaded it. And somewhere in his head, he's like, I know why I loaded it. And Ed comes up and confronts him about what happened 4 years ago that he's really fucking hung up on. Like, you pulled one over on me, child.
Did he not see the gun
Right.
at any point?
Yeah.
Just the balls on Ed to just right in front of Todd, like put all the pieces of this conspiracy together right in front of him. And Ed says, how did this happen? To which Todd replies, one thing led to another. Simple as that. And then shoots him several times. The line, he sure did die hard for a guidance counselor, and then laughed.
He died saying his kid's
a good
name.
line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To which that name had no reference to Todd, so he's like, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
And then shot him in the head.
Tragic. And then leading to the final, he drives off with his rifle. And the final line of the book, it was 5 hours later and almost dark before they took him down.
Because he went to the spot where he was
It's
looking at
fire.
people.
So goddamn bleak. I just wanted, for one last time, to hate on the goddamn movie. This is real fucked.
Do you want to rate the movie? Can you include this in your rating?
Yeah, let's get
okay,
into
well,
the ratings.
I need to separate myself from this whole experience as soon as possible.
No, this is real fucked. So in the book, Ed French comes up, and he's not exactly a hero. He dies a tragic death, but he dies speaking the names of his daughter. He's married. He's just a good guy trying to do right.
Yeah.
In the movie, he's David Schwimmer, which is the first problem. And early in the movie, he's really only in like 2 or 3 scenes. And there's a scene where he says, where he says, hey, if you get your grades up, we'll forget this whole thing. And he kind of like winks at him. And I even thought, are they doing like he's a weird creep thing? That's weird.
Yep. Didn't like that.
Yeah, did not like that.
Not a fan.
And then it's not brought up until the end of the movie, the final scene. The final scene that in the book is so dark and so tense and terrifying. The final scene is in the movie, Ed French going up to Todd, who's playing fucking basketball. And he goes, hey, I know everything that happened. And Todd goes, well, you gotta forget about it, because I'm gonna tell everyone that you diddled me. That's it.
Check and mate.
Movie over. Okay. First of all, that's a terrible way to end a movie.
Yep.
Really dumb. This is why it is vile. The book equates being a Nazi is just as bad as being this evil American kid. The murders and the evil make them equal.
Right.
The movie is saying being a Nazi is exactly as bad as being a kid that falsely accuses a man of sexual assault. Bryan Singer directed this movie. Who knows the history of Bryan Singer?
Oh, God.
I do not.
I feel like I can guess
In
it.
in the past few years, I don't remember, he has been accused multiple times of being a pedophile and sexually assaulting young boys. On the set of this movie, a 14-year-old extra in the shower scene sued the producers because Bryan Singer made them all shower naked without anyone's permission.
Oh, man.
On that note, I would like to rate the book, Apt Pupil, a solid 5 out of 5 blue chambray shirts. And the movie, a negative 5 blue chambray shirts. Fuck Nazis and fuck Bryan Singer.
Wow.
Mic drop.
Can I unwatch this movie?
You can try.
God. Josh?
All right. So
Really ending it on a
we're
positive note
we're really
here.
dialing it in here. For my scores, I'm going to give Apt Pupil. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5, only because of how rushed that ending was, and I just had a problem with the amount of domino setup that was like, all right, oh shit, I need to end this. Let's put all this stuff in. Let's put a magic super Nazi hunter that can fill in every single blank at the drop of a hat. And it was a little too Deus Ex Machina for me. But God, I really enjoyed it. And the movie, 1 out of 5. It was appalling. It was a bastardization of the source material.
Bad movie.
I was going to give the movie like a 3 out of 5 before, Ben, you informed us of those horrible details. Because, in my opinion, the worst offense of the movie at that time was that it was kind of boring and it didn't really capture that relationship very well, which was the crux of the book. Mm. So now I don't watch the movie.
That's fair. Doing it.
As far as the book goes, my biggest issue with the book, other than every minute I had to read it, was the character of Todd. I found him, it was gratuitous and one-dimensional. I felt like the entire time I was being beat over the head with the fact that this kid, this all-American, blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy, is a sociopath. And I guess I just wanted something a little more graceful. And if you guys want to know what I mean by that, watch or read I Am Not a Serial Killer.
Okay.
So I would have to give the book, man, this is a tough one.
Is this our first one?
Well, I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy reading it. It was effective, though. And
I swear to God, if you give this book a 5 out of 5.
Do not harp on her score. It's her score, then.
This is not the type of horror that I get off on. As I said before, this is real things that have happened, real people. I like my boogeymen to be more mystical and out there. People don't do this. But is that the book's fault? No. So I'm going to have to say 5 out of 5.
Fantastic.
Amazing.
Oh, and the movie in NA. So
yeah, just
the movie just doesn't. She's erased it from her mind. She has no score because it doesn't exist.
All right.
So that's it for this episode of Derry Public Radio. As always, thank you for listening. Join us next episode for part 3, where we will cover The Body. And again, we will watch the movie entitled Stand By Me. For Benjamin Graham and Joshua Kahn, I am CM Alexander, reminding you, I don't think anyone dies happy, but you could die well. Hey everyone, CM Alexander here. Well, that got dark, and then darker, then disgusting and reprehensible. This story clearly had an effect on the 3 of us, and we'd like to know how you felt about it. But first, I want to say a few words about this episode's sponsor, Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/Derry and browse their awesome selection of audio programs, download a title for free, and start listening. It's that easy. Go to audibletrial.com/Derry. And if you're thinking, I've already read that book, CM, what do I need with an audiobook? Having a book read to you is a unique experience that I highly recommend. I personally enjoy the opportunity to devour my favorite stories in every format available. And you can switch seamlessly between audiobook and ebook with Audible's Whisper Sync feature. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Derry. It feels wrong to say I hope you enjoyed part 2 of Different Seasons' Apt Pupil, but then again, I did give it 5 blue chambray shirts. Tell us how you would rate it on our Facebook and Instagram at Derry Public Radio or Twitter at Derry Public. You can also send questions to our email at derrypublicradio@gmail.com. I'd like to leave you with this bit of info. In 1987, Alan Bridges started filming an adaptation of Apt Pupil. They got a chunk of footage shot before it was ultimately scrapped, and Stephen King supposedly thought the rough cut was very good. I wish I could have watched that movie. Goodbye, listeners.